Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Knowledge Exchange webinar series. My name is Michael Guerin, and I'm today's host. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest speaker, Dave Darkangelo. Dave's professional and career includes time as a USAF weather officer, a staff meteorologist for Delta Airlines, a meteorologist for Synergy, and more recently as the chief meteorologist for Susquehanna International Group, LLP. In today's webinar, our focus will be on the early parts of Dave's career and how he got to be the success he is today. So without further ado, Dave, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate carving out a little bit of time today, and I'm happy to talk about my career. It was joked to me when I shared with somebody that we were doing this today. They said, "This is your old person interview," and so I guess I've reached that point where I have some experience to talk about. I'm happy to share it. I think my career has taken some turns that I didn't expect, and a lot of changes have happened in the field of meteorology, particularly operational weather forecasting over the last few decades. So I'm pretty happy to share and participate today. Thanks.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So I'll start us off kind of an easy one. What made you decide to work as a forecaster for the USAF as opposed to the other fields that typically go to meteorologists, like broadcast or the National Weather Service?
Sure. So actually, it was purely a selfish reason at first. I was an out-of-state student for where I wanted to go to school, and it was challenging to meet tuition payments without some assistance. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, though, that I had a love of meteorology that came from my dad, who would have considered himself an amateur meteorologist back in the day. In the 1960s, my dad was assigned to a weather unit in Southeast Asia when he was deployed there for a year. And he wasn't a weather forecaster himself, but he kind of grew to love the field of meteorology from a very amateur way. I grew up in New Hampshire, and from a young age, I remember there was always a index card taped up on in the inside of the kitchen cabinet, and on that, my dad will record snowfall and the date. And living in New Hampshire, there was always activity to go on, and over the years, my dad recorded almost 40 years of yearly snowfall data. And so it's kind of a treasure trove. So I grew up from a very early age with a love of forecasting. But to go back to the school part, I wanted to study meteorology. I didn't necessarily have this idea that I wanted to be an operational weather forecaster, but the pathways were also much more limited back in the early to mid 1990s. Right, you could choose a path in academia, and often that included research or some teaching position. There was research that was being done at some national labs, and there was also a very small private sector, but the Air Force provided me an opportunity to go to school on a scholarship. And so from that, I came in through the door of needing some money, but really then began to really enjoy the idea of service, and really look forward to spending those early years of my career in the Air Force as a weather officer. It was unbelievable training, and I had an ultimate privilege, and I was really given a tremendous gift in my first assignment in the Air Force. I was assigned to Andrews Air Force Base, which is where all the worldwide presidential forecasting is done for Air Force One. So I got an early look at kind of global weather and really intense forecast environment under some great tutelage. So I came in through the door of going to the Air Force first for the money as an opportunity to go to school, and then really for the idea that it was really great to serve. And I really had a really great experience in my first couple of assignments, particularly that first one at Andrews Air Force Base.
Yeah, and then I could spend probably an entire webcast talking about that alone. The
Sure.
fact that you were forecasting for Air Force One, which is just super cool. Like I don't know how else to describe it, but uh, I just really want to highlight there. We've done plenty of these webcasts, and a lot of times, when I always ask the same general type of questions. How did you get into the field that you got into? And a lot of times, it's pretty much the words change, but the answer is generally the same. That you kind of go where the opportunities take you, and you had the opportunity to get that Air Force either scholarship or additional funding for your college, and that's where the opportunity takes you. And it sounds like you made the absolute most of that opportunity. I can't think of a meteorologist that wouldn't want to forecast for Air Force One. A lot of pressure, but still a great
Sure.
opportunity.
Sure. And it was
So
also different. It was a different kind of feel back then. Like I came in I wouldn't even call it really the infancy of the internet age. It was really almost like pre that. So the pathways into meteorology no matter where you went, whether it was private sector, whether it was military service, whether it was public sector through the government, um, those were much more limited than they ended up becoming over the next few decades. And I know our conversation will go that direction. But one thing that has always kind of fascinated me by looking in hindsight was that you're right. People, there was only like a few tracks that people took, and obviously broadcast meteorology was one of those. But even then, they felt like somewhat limited, and that had been true for a number of years. And that period, a really interesting part of my early part of my career was that explosion of growth in the field of meteorology and the interest of good meteorology, whether it be research, whether it be operational forecasting, whether it be risk management. It really tremendously grew in that period from the 90s to the early 2000s. So I guess, right place, right time in terms of, coming of age in the early part of my career during the early years of the internet was just a stroke of luck, but it was really wonderful to see. And it's still amazing to me today to see, the growth of meteorology and the interest of utilizing that field.
Yeah, and even, I'll kind of my own personal anecdote is I didn't know there was an entire field of private sector meteorology with like the company you work at right now, or whether it's I think Risk Pulse or Maxar or whatever. There was one local one here in New Jersey that I can't quite remember the name of, but all these different fields and paths of meteorology were foreign to me too, even going back I forget when I graduated, 6 years or something now.
Right.
Um, so I didn't know that they existed then either. And it's funny how some things change. Obviously meteorology has come leaps and bounds. I used to talk to my dad about, he grew up in New York in the 50s, and he would tell me like, oh, the weatherman would say it was going to snow big and it wound up raining, or he'd say it'd be clear, and then 2 days later they had 16 inches of snow on the ground. And there's not actually much you can do in those days. They didn't have all the stuff we have today, satellite data, and dropsondes, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but yeah, it's really amazing to see how far meteorology's come, not just in your lifetime, but in mine as well.
Right, absolutely. So just share a quick story. So when I started that first job at Andrews Air Force Base, the lead weather forecaster for Air Force One was a civilian, so that they could be there through a long period of continuity and provide continuity across a number of years. You have to remember in the mid 1990s, as far as computer modeling went, we had a fraction of what we see today. We really saw very little beyond the 3-day window, and we saw some out to the 5-day window. This gentleman, who had been forecasting and started with the Navy in the 1960s, understood what we now know as today global teleconnections. I don't know if they were called this back then, but one of his attempts in the mid 90s to support presidential operations was he started it, and I was skeptical of it, but then I got to kind of see the in action, was do a 10-day weather forecast for Washington, D.C., based upon what he saw as global teleconnections. So the kind of teleconnections we see at days 3, 4, and 5, and expressing them in a forecast going on another 5 or 6 days from that was really fascinating to me. And it was like, well, how are we doing this? And how are we able to do this with even like a small sense of skill well beyond model space? And so coming of age in that kind of environment, and we take that for granted today, that we kind of see these 10-day forecasts all the time. But sometimes I'll spend some time reflecting on like, wow, I did a 10-day forecast in 1994, and back then it felt completely revolutionary. I'd like to go back and see some of the skill of those forecasts. I can't imagine they were very good. However, the fact that we were making an attempt to do them was felt pretty revolutionary. And you're right, we've come really incredibly far since then.
Yeah, and I think I remember even back some only 10 years ago, maybe a little longer now, but seeing the GFS at day 5 or 6, you'd be like, that's Fantasyland. Now GFS Fantasyland gets you to hour 240, day 10. So um, but
Right.
I do have to we got to move on a little bit. So what
Sure.
made you switch from the USAF, which sounded like it was a great time, to private sector companies like Delta and later on where you're at now, Susquehanna?
Right. So that's a good question. So I had a departure from the Air Force in 2000. There was a natural, because I had supported aviation forecasting, it was a natural fit to move towards a private sector that had meteorologists that were supporting aviation. So Delta Airlines was a really natural fit. But prior to going to Delta Airlines, when I was in graduate school, I heard a seminar from a company that some of your listeners might know, and that's Enron. And Enron in the late 1990s had a team of meteorologists, and I heard a talk in graduate school from one of them about the ways they were applying weather in what was then the infancy of kind of the energy commodity space that we know of today. And I thought, that's a really cool thing, right? They're taking weather information and using it to assess risk rather than just giving information to kind of mitigate risk, as how we used it in the Air Force, right? To avoid areas of turbulence, to avoid severe weather. They were using weather in a different way. And that was it was really novel to me that, you're using weather to apply it in the financial space and to try to help people make decisions around markets, to make money, to look at risk a different kind of way. And so, long story short, was I never went to work for a company called Enron, and thankfully, because they were gone a few years later. But the ideas of what they were doing and other very early private sector meteorologists really sparked an interest in me. So I had a very short stint at Delta Airlines, and it was really cut short by the events of 9/11. I'd only worked for Delta a little more than a year. I was very junior there, and so the aviation space was going to shrink dramatically. And so I always kind of joke that one of the really good forecasts I made was that the aviation industry was going to suffer. It wasn't a weather forecast; it was a forecast for how the industry was going to change over the next few years. And that was true, but it gave me an entry point and an opportunity to try to get into the energy commodity space. So I had some circumstances happen. Obviously, there was geopolitical things that were occurring. There was the growth of what was then a deregulated energy market. And so the idea that private sector meteorologists were beginning to be hired and to provide really critical support to financial-based decisions was, again, a fortuitous part of, I guess it was the right place at the right time. So I had an opportunity to move to a utility in Ohio based out of Cincinnati. That was Synergy. They had a meteorologist on staff, so I got to learn under somebody that had been in the industry for a few years and knew the ropes and kind of knew what we were doing. But we were kind of creating things on the fly, I guess, in terms of how to communicate weather. And two, it also really broadened my horizons. Aviation weather forecasting, other than those 10-day forecasts that we would do for Washington, D.C. for kind of, it felt like for fun a little bit. The real critical part of aviation forecasting is very short term, 6, 12, 24 hours in the future. And energy kind of really opened my eyes up to this idea behind, the 10-day forecast, the 15-day forecast, thinking about something that's much longer range, different facets of that too, right? Temperature forecasting, cloud cover, precipitation. It was the early days too of a deregulated market. And from the ruins of Enron, though, grew out a lot of really great meteorologists had come into the industry, and they were scattered amongst banks and hedge funds and private and utilities like I worked at. And so it was just really right place at right time, Michael. And I was really fascinated about how can we use weather information to kind of make money, right? And that's a vague term, and I didn't really understand necessarily how we were going to do that. But it was like, wow, you're using it in a way that I really never imagined. We had really access to much more data, right? We were seeing data from the European model. The speed at which we started to see information began to grow substantially. And so we kind of were creating how to communicate, and the infancy for this, this new field is really how it felt. I guess I came into it probably in the first, 5 or so years of people moving into the commodity space. There had been a little bit in agriculture going back to the 1980s, but it was very small, and they tended to have a smaller niche. So, this was really, again, I think just right place at the right time. And to move towards commodities was obviously, and that's where I've spent the rest of my career for almost, coming up on 20 years. And so I've watched that industry grow and how meteorologists have been used in that way. So, partly circumstance and partly, I think, just seeing maybe what looked like an opportunity. It wasn't like it was without, some concern that, like, well, what if this doesn't pan out, or what if this, commodity market, energy market thing collapses? What if they don't need meteorologists? Or it's always the fear of making a bad call. But it was just, it just was fascinating to me because it was different from aviation forecasting. It felt completely fresh each day. The kind of questions, the kind of people you would run across, the way they looked at the world in terms of fitting together weather with other information was just really unique.
Yeah, I agree. And I really want to highlight, two things there. Obviously, you did take a, you take a risk whenever you start a new job venture, especially in a growing field, and that's something that, young career professionals and students and really anyone, any job you're taking can be a risk, and but you have to be willing to take some risks. Otherwise, you're just gonna end up sitting home unemployed the whole time if you don't take any risks. So I just want to highlight that it's important to take some risks. Not don't go crazy with it, obviously, of course,
Sure,
but take
sure.
some risks, and you could end up one day as the chief meteorologist at Susquehanna. And I also want to just kind of point out that you said you had a mentor basically when you went to Synergy, and I think that's important too because a lot of times people are looking for mentors or don't know that they need a mentor, and somebody steps in, whether through chance or maybe you ask them some questions, and kind of develop that mentor student relationship, and that's something that's super super important, especially when you're starting in a new field.
Mhm.
There was some similarities, but I imagine that he your mentor, the chief meteorologist at Synergy, helped you to make that switch a lot and that transition from Air Force and airplane forecasting for weather to more of a uh, commodities uh,
That's
version.
absolutely right. Yeah, very true. And I think back to having a mentor when I started working in the presidential forecast unit at Andrews Air Force Base. That mentor, who I thought at the time was quite old, is I'm probably catching up to kind of where that person was at this time. Um, but somebody who had a lot of experience, and I guess I've also been lucky, not just being in the right place at the right time, but being around people who wanted to kind of pass on some knowledge to me, and and I think that that's really valuable. And so those words are, I think those really strike me as is really vital as to when you're young to be looking for somebody, and also for the people who are more experienced to don't forget to pass on a lot of institutional knowledge that you've gained through the years.
Right, and here you are right now giving back to, our viewers, and hopefully somebody, one of our viewers, or finds something valuable from what you're saying. Um, so now I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit on our next question. I know, and it said I do research on and on LinkedIn it said you did some hiring. I don't know how much hiring you did, so I don't know how much you'll be able to answer this. But so what was one trait or skill when you were doing hiring that you looked for that was like a wow, I'm going to put this person at the top of the pile?
That's a good question, and I've thought a little bit about that. I saw some of these questions in advance. I did a good amount of hiring when I was at Synergy. I managed the fundamental team there, so I had a team of both meteorologists and people who you would call like researchers on the commodity side. And so bringing a team together like that, and I've done a little bit of hiring in my present role. Um, One of the things that I think is important is someone's capacity to learn and grow, to show the ability um, to take on new roles. Somebody who looks like they have a desire to grow. Sometimes we look to hire somebody with a specific skill set, and what ends up happening is because they have a desire to grow and learn, they end up doing something that maybe is very different a year or two down the road. So I guess a little bit of a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for growth, not thinking that you're so specific, particularly when you're young, that you may do one thing really well, but the ability to show some adaptiveness to your environment and willingness to kind of grow outside that role, maybe of what your expertise is. Sometimes we like to hear. I've heard it said that we like to hire smart people because they can do a lot of different things. I'd add we like to hire smart people who have that capacity to learn, the desire to learn, because I think your career takes so many different twists and turns. Just in the first, say, 10 years of being out of school, you don't really know what you're going to do yet. You might find an employer sees you as a good fit for something else, and to have um, an ability to take on some new roles like that is important. If we're specifically talking about the operational forecast space, I think a few important roles for me is somebody who maybe has a little bit of, I think the word I look for is a little humility in kind of what they do. That's the ability to be able to take criticism, to be able to adapt and change, to be able to sometimes have a thick skin, to be able to withstand the criticism and also grow from it. So I've always enjoyed working with people that come from this view of like, I don't know everything, I'm still learning, because I still think I'm learning. I think each good forecast or bad forecast is an opportunity to grow. The way we communicate, um, the way we crunch numbers, the way we show what we think of as skill. There's always ways to learn, and so somebody with a little humility, there's a lot of mistakes that will get made in the operational forecast space. And I've never met anyone yet that has it all figured out. And so I think that's really a kind of a thing that I'm looking for as well. But really the first one is really the capacity to grow, take on different roles, try different things, maybe wear some different hats that you didn't expect that you might have. Somebody might see something in you that you don't see in yourself, and you find yourself in a new role. So the willingness to take that on.
Yeah, and I wanna highlight a couple of really important things there. Like, the adaptability. I think you're absolutely right. Being able to, maybe you go in looking for an operational forecaster job, and they think you're perfect for a research forecaster job, and that's the kind of thing. You don't know where life's gonna take you usually. At least I haven't met anyone that does. um, and it doesn't hurt to, and this is something I've said a number of times, is it doesn't hurt to apply, because you don't know, like, if I apply to, like I said, that operational forecasting, the guy going through the resumes might see and think, oh, well, this guy's not good for operational, but maybe on the research or maybe on something else. You never know. And I think that's super important. And also, that humility, having done in the forecast contest a number of really questionable forecasts. I'll leave it at that. I can say that if there's one thing that can definitely humble anyone, it's definitely the weather, especially at lead times of 15 plus days.
Sure,
Um,
sure. I
and
think one thing too, I'm gonna go back to the first point for a
sure,
second about this kind of willingness to learn and grow. I think for a lot of young people, and this has always been true, no matter kind of when you've graduated, whether it was me in 1994 or whether you're someone graduating today, is the job that you're going to hold in 10 years may not even exist right now. In
right.
fact, oftentimes it doesn't. And so um, the the curiosity to explore things that may not seem like a perfect fit for you, you just don't know where it's going to lead you because, like I said, I think that job that is sitting out there maybe in 10 years is going to be something that we just don't even think of today. We'll be using weather or meteorology in ways that but we probably don't really quite expect. In some ways we might, but in a lot of ways we don't. And the capacity to and the curiosity to just to kind of just go with it is really really going to be important.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially I think I just read that I always get the two confused, but I think they just managed to get a positive net energy gain on nuclear fusion, or I want to say it's fusion. I always get them mixed up, but if you 50 years ago, probably no such job existed. I don't even know. I think 70 years ago, such technology was like super top secret classified. Not even no
Right.
one was really allowed to see it. So you never know. You never know. And I agree with that. So we have time for one more question. So, do you have any advice for students who might be looking to get into the field of either private sector meteorology or government meteorology, or just any advice for students in general?
Sure, sure. It's a little bit difficult for me to speak to the government side because I'm a little
Right.
bit disconnected from that. But from the private sector side, the areas that I'm seeing opportunities just in the last 5 years have really grown tremendous. I think there's a huge data science element. There's machine learning, artificial intelligence, the applications of that. We're seeing meteorologists pop up not just in like traditional energy space with regards to commodities trading, like agriculture and things like natural gas and electricity, but we're seeing people be put to use in renewables and renewable forecasting. In the retail space, that has existed for a while, but it continues to grow and look very different. And I think as data science gets applied more in that, I think we're going to see some really interesting things. So I think coming with some exposure and some desire to learn more about the data science, be able to work with large data sets, especially if you can apply it in kind of a machine learning space, I think that's going to be super vital. I think that will continue to grow tremendously. The operational forecasters, like when you look at people like me and how I started the early part of my career 20 years ago, I think that will ultimately get not phased out, but that will morph and it will start to look a lot different. So going into a traditional forecaster role might still exist. However, there's going to be the add-ons of the data science part. We'll communicate it differently. I think we will understand risk a little bit differently. Each year we kind of, we collect more data, we understand and we can evaluate, and in forecast space, kind of things like biases, things like distributional outcomes. And as we see that, the data science part is going to become just really, really important. I think anyone with a desire to go into the data science / meteorology component, and I don't really see them as maybe separate. They're really kind of co-equal at this point. And the other advice is just to be able to take risks. And if you don't love that first job, you don't know what it might open up. You don't know what door it might open up. And these opportunities are popping up in places that we just don't expect, not just in industry, but also geographically. When I started 20 years ago, I was working in Ohio at a utility, but a lot of energy meteorologists worked in Houston, and now they work everywhere. So I think a willingness to move and to try something. And again, that job you probably will hold in 10 years might not exist today. And you'll probably hold multiple jobs. I think back to this conversation, that we've had today, Michael, and I, had 4 big career moves in the first 9 years of my career, including 4 different states. So you just didn't know. I think I was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, but the willingness to move was important too. So again, if you don't love what you maybe do at first, and like I said, you made a comment before about it never hurts to just apply and have a conversation, because the field is changing fairly rapidly. We're going to use what meteorologists and good weather data in ways that we probably don't expect yet.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to echo. We had another gentleman on, I think 2 months back, Warwick Norton, uh, of Citadel, and he was also mentioning that the future of meteorology looks to be like machine learning forecasts, and that's very interesting, but it might put me out of a job. But no, absolutely
Well,
agree
I think we'll just
100%.
I think that maybe that's a fear, but I think we'll use meteorologists in different ways, and I think that's
Yeah.
gonna be fun to watch. I think that will occur, and that will be fun to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate the points you made, that you can't be afraid to take risks. You can't be afraid to move. I say that and I'm afraid to move myself, but you can't be afraid to take the opportunities that life gives you, and if that opportunity takes you to Oregon, then it takes you to Oregon. Maybe you get
Mhm.
lucky and it's in your backyard, but life doesn't usually go that way. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today.
I really enjoyed it, Michael. You're
I hope our
welcome.
viewers found your talk as interesting and inspiring as I did. And I really hope we can have you back to talk about other periods of your career, or maybe to talk about forecasting for Air Force One, because I think a lot of people probably want to hear about that. I'm not sure you're allowed to say it, but
I would love
um,
that. I could share quite a bit and a few good stories too. But thank you.
And for the folks who would like to talk further with Dave, or perhaps solicit career advice, you can book a meeting with Dave via theknowledgeexchange.com, where we've got plenty of other great volunteers, givers, and mentors who are all there to share their wealth of knowledge with you. And finally, we will be posting all of our videos on our YouTube channel, the link to which will be in your MailChimp. You can also find more info about the Knowledge Exchange on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. And if you have any questions for today's moderator or speaker, you can find us at info@knowledgeexchange.com. Thanks everyone for watching.